Hi everybody, Dana here again with more Tuesday tips for leaders of volunteers. And this week talking about risk mitigation and scenario planning in a system that I refer to as Plan.Do.Check.Act. Plan.Do.Check.Act. And what this is useful for is kind of setting up an evaluation kind of feedback mechanism for any kind of new program initiatives, change management, or responding to, those are kind of in some internal examples of how you might use Plan.Do.Check.Act in scenario planning and risk mitigation evaluation. But external pressures like, say, a pandemic or an economic downturn or a natural disaster or anything else that may be beyond your control from an external source, and having a way to scenario plan for a few different contingencies with low stakes or high stakes is a really important skill to have, and I think a really interesting way to engage volunteers and the community, because that's where some of the wisdom in this process is going to come from, as well as a lot of the action items. So these can be set up as volunteer committees or blended paid unpaid team member committees, or members of the community serving in certain roles, volunteer or appointed roles. So let's get into what Plan.Do.Check.Act really is. So the first approach, or the way to center this, is people first, considering the needs of people first, then places, and then the process. And too often I've seen a nonprofit it go the other way, where we've decided on a process and then we roll it out, and the places or the people that it's impacting, it doesn't really work the way it does. So let's start with a human-centered approach. In times of increased change and uncertainty, again, internal or external, leaders are called upon for decisive action, and even in the face of unpredictable events. So this is how Plan.Do.Check.Act as scenario planning is really effective. It allows leaders to take meaningful actions by exploring a range of possibilities and futures rather than betting on a single predictive outcome. So we start by defining a few scenarios, maybe 3 or 4 scenarios, a couple internal or a couple external. And if you're doing change management or you're doing a program rollout, you may already have some really great data-driven results and analytics of, what's most likely to occur. For the sake of Plan.Do.Check.Act, we're not trying to predict what's most likely. We're trying to predict actually what's what's least likely, and how do we not get too settled in our ways and how we react to things. So having that flexibility and adaptability is really important. So we want to define scenarios, ask some questions, and then predict the impact on the agency and how we'd respond. So some critical questions are, if you're facing a crisis, or if you're doing a change management, or just a every few years program evaluation. So these 3 questions to keep in mind are: what still works? What's the keepers? What does not work any longer, at least right now? If it used to work well, or it might in the past, it might work well again in the future, but what's not working right now? And then what can be done differently? What's realistic within the capacity of the agency or your mission to be done differently? And that's usually where people start to get hung up on feeling a sense of overwhelm. But again, this isn't designed to be overwhelming, but actually to help you build some systems, mechanisms, committees that get into perpetual motion and get into this Plan.Do.Check.Act cycle. So scenario planning, when the future is unlikely to be exactly the same as the past, and hey, that describes the last few years pretty well, and decisive action is required, it's good for leaders to explore these different futures to not only expand their perspective, but potentially update the culture of the agency to be more welcoming, belonging, inclusive, and also in the face of maybe a pretty intense crisis or emergency, take a no regrets move. So even if you do a move and in the Plan.Do.Check.Act cycle, it doesn't turn out that well, that's still information, that's still data. So not playing a blame game, not stopping to point fingers, but just identifying signals to watch for that allow leadership and everyone to move and work more effectively and make sense of events as they unfold, and better be adaptable to respond to those events. So the goal of Plan.Do.Check.Act is not to identify, again, which is most probable, but to use the different scenarios and experiences to really expand thinking and awareness, and then design a more clear and flexible approach to planning during uncertain times. And often when I've seen clients or peers, colleagues undertaking this process, their leaders, executive leadership, will decide and realize that they've been making some pretty strong assumptions or unstated predictions about a future in their strategies that just may not be true anymore. So again, we want this to be people-centered and data-driven. So with Plan.Do.Check.Act, you can do this in ideally 30-day, 60-day, and 90-day cycle plans. And here's what that looks like. You can think of some scenarios as what's a gradual rollout or a gradual recovery from a crisis or emergency. What does gradual look like? What does fits and starts look like? What would be the perfect storm for success, or the perfect storm for disaster? Those are two sides of the same coin. And then the fourth scenario to consider is, what is that great correction? What is the most amount of change that could occur or need to occur to be successful as an agency and be resilient and sustainable for the future with the community that you work with? So kind of thinking about gradual, fits and starts, perfect storm, and great correction in scenario planning. So in the Plan.Do.Check cycle, it's like it looks and like it sounds. Planning is identifying these problems. Doing is testing potential solutions or rolling out new programs or initiatives in response to that. And then that 30, 60, 90-day cycle that I mentioned is really about checking the results and being really emotionally neutral on the feedback. Again, just getting data of what works, what doesn't, and then acting on implementing the best solution from the rest of the data from that cycle in the Plan.Do.Check.Act. So this can be, again, ideally tested or rolled out in about a 3-month time frame. You can also do this in 6 months, in a year, in 3 years, whatever kind of fits with the usual timeline and mission cycles or seasons of your agency. It's very, very adaptable. In a practical way, there are 9 steps to Plan.Do.Check.Act. Form work groups. Again, this is a great volunteer-led project, very empowering for people and great community feedback. Deliberate the scenarios and the solutions. Step 3, create scalable models. Step 4, maintain standards, or maybe set some standards of this is how we're going to evaluate this work, or these are the bare minimums we want to reach or get to. And then step 5, document the results. Again, good, bad, ugly, neutral, whatever comes back to you. Step 6, communicate what is going on and get that response cycle going. 7, check and test the new scenario, the risk management, the new program, the evaluation, but checking and testing it, and then regroup, see how that went. And step 9 is it's a cycle, is to repeat that. It can sound like a lot, but it doesn't have to be. Again, this is a great volunteer empowerment or driven project or community committee. So getting kind of, once you do a little bit of front loading of the work and setting this up, this can be a really great system for course correction, change management, cultural updates, cultural improvements to the agency overall. And again, the whole point is to be as effective and impactful in your mission in the community that you work with and serve as much as possible. So I hope you enjoy and practice Plan.Do.Check.Act, and let me know if you have any questions, and let me know how it works out for you. Dana@danalitwin.com. And we've always got Tuesday tips, so remember to please hit like, subscribe if you're not already on my fans and friends list, and hit that little bell icon so you know when brand new videos are coming out and you get first look. Thanks everyone, and we'll see you next time.